Thanks for tuning in to Thoughts for Tuesday, hosted by Bates Communications, a podcast series about business trends and leadership insights from the experts.
Hi, this is Suzanne Bates, CEO of Bates, a management consulting firm with a mission to help leaders shape the world. And my conversation partner today is Corey Thomas, CEO of Rapid7. Our topic today is leading growth. Rapid7 is in the business of detecting and managing cybersecurity risk, one of the most pressing business challenges of our time. On Corey's watch, the company has gone public, more than quadrupled its revenues. As head of sales, he then rose to become COO before being named CEO in 2012. Corey, great to be here in your state-of-the-art office. It's really beautiful, and you just get a great vibe walking around here. It's amazing. I can just feel the culture. Congratulations.
Suzanne, thank you very much. It is. I really appreciate you having me, and thank you for letting me be on the show.
Yeah. Well, so our topic today is growth. And you're a good person to talk with about growth, obviously, because you've had a lot of success at it. Growth is really hard for companies, even when the economy is booming globally. There's so many challenges to face, disruption, just the speed of business. And, we've been doing some research, and we found even some of the fastest growing companies within 5 years are tailing off or even going out of business. So I'm curious about how you think about the growth challenge.
Yeah, so I think growth is a derivative of learning. So first and foremost, I think it's always, what do you expect around growth? And so what are your expectations? And so if you expect a nice, beautiful graph that they give you in business school where it's up and to the right, then you may get it for a point in time, but then you'll actually fail. I think growth, like anything else, is a derivative of learning and exploration. And so what that means is that, if you think about whether it's sort of like physical growth and physical activity or personal growth, is to get the most benefits over time, you have to go through those hiccups, you have to go through those painful periods. Those are the actual things that actually create growth and allow you to actually get new capabilities, to be able to do new things, to get new perspectives that lets you reach that next pinnacle. And if you're not getting those stretch moments, if you're not getting those stressors, and if you're not learning from them positively, then that's when you actually start capping your ability to actually reach that next pinnacle.
Yeah. What do you do in the times when you face challenge? I mean, as you said, growth isn't a straight up curve by any means, even if you're having rapid growth. How do you handle the bumps in the road?
So my attitude is that so I think about growth and I think about the bumps in the road, not about whether I will encounter bumps. I have a predisposition that I'll encounter bumps. The question is, how much can I learn from them and how fast can I accelerate out of them? And so when I think about what I want to be the best in the world at, it's the learning and adopting. So when I hit a challenge, sort of like, do I learn more than anyone else from that challenge? And then do I leverage that learning and apply it so that I can actually accelerate and adapt better than anyone else? And in that model of the world, we try to institutionalize that at our company. In that model of the world, the benefit that we get is that every challenge we actually have actually makes us stronger.
Yeah. That's so interesting because we've been doing some new work on teams, and one of the most important qualities for teams is resilience. So it's the ability, as you're describing, to bounce back and just to almost expect it, right?
Yes.
You got to expect.
Expectations matter hugely.
Yeah,
yes.
They really do. Yeah. So I'm curious about what kind of leadership culture you have created here, or you're trying to create here, because it's always a challenge to maintain and continue to build a culture, especially when you're growing. What is the leadership culture here that you think has contributed to your growth?
Yeah, I love the way you framed it as sort of both what do you have and what are you trying to have, because I actually think that it's a constant effort. I would say that was probably one of the poor assumptions I had as I was sort of like stepping into the leadership role, is that once you have something, you get to keep it, which just isn't true with culture. It's something that must be consistently nurtured. So the culture that we have here, when you think about what are the underlying assumptions and aspirations that pervade the place, there's a couple. One of the underlying assumptions is that our success is achieved through both learning better than other people and experimenting, exploring, testing boundaries better than other people. And so when you think about the core, we have these two core pillars that I think are differentiated, is continuous learning. And so and we test for that in a whole bunch of different ways, but one of the foundational assumptions is everyone here is competent and good, and everyone's aspiration here should be that they should be twice as good 2 to 3 years from now than they are today. Is that no one's complete. No team's complete. I'm not complete. The team's not complete. And having that attitude of that we're getting better together, both as individuals and as teams, and we have to continue to invest there, is a core tenet. So that's our continuous learning tenet. And the other one, which is actually sounds easy in technology but is somewhat hard, is this disciplined risk-taking tenet. And the idea behind the disciplined risk-taking and that it's hard is that when things are working and you're comfortable, that's when you need to actually be more deeply introspective. That's when you need to question more. That's when you need to actually take action and move yourself out of your comfort zone and actually figure out how to stretch yourself and grow, both as an organization and as a team. And I can tell you, that actually is sort of like trying on the soul at times, because it feels like, one of the challenging pieces of feedback we get is sort of you can never rest. And so when you have this attitude that we can always be better and we always have to sort of like push the boundaries, sometimes you get a perspective that you can actually never rest. But that has also allowed lots of personal growth here, where we do lots of promotion and development from within. And it's allowed our organization to grow, even if it's choppy sometimes.
Yeah. It's an interesting conundrum for a lot of companies, I think, that realize that to innovate, they have to have curious people. And curiosity requires humility. And that's another area that we've studied a lot, humility, the balance of humility and confidence to take risks, but being humble enough to know you don't have all the answers. Do you think that you can teach that to people? I know you have a lot of professional development, but those are traits of people.
I do think it's harder to teach. I would say that right now we filter more for the original instantiation you gave of us, which is curiosity. And the way that I think about curiosity, and I love the way you tied it to humility, is that curiosity, if people are curious about the world, curious about others, and curious about themselves, then that's a great framework for building both great teams, having amazing collaboration, having amazing innovation, but also having people that have self-awareness. I view self-awareness as a derivative of curiosity about the self. And where people aren't curious about others, they lack empathy. Where they're not curious about themselves, they lack self-awareness. And where they're not curious about the world, I think they're set up for stagnation. And so what we try to actually increase, and this has been a journey, frankly, in our hiring practices, is we try to increasingly find people that are curious and curious about sort of like many, many different aspects of life. And if they're that, then actually they have the framework and the foundation for humility, for learning, for groups, collaboration, for a whole bunch of things. But I think that curiosity is becoming more and more an important criteria for us.
I know a little about your background, but I don't think our listeners probably do. So I wonder if you could briefly tell your story, where you came from, and how you got here.
Yeah, and so I grew up in Georgia, outside of Georgia, sort of two towns, College Park and Riverdale, Georgia, to working class parents who actually demonstrated an amazing model of a deep belief that if you actually worked hard and did the right thing, you could actually achieve and be successful and sort of grow. And so my father, who finished high school, was a self-taught electrician. My mother, who started off as a secretary, ended up being an administrative district in her school district. But I had this model with my parents of people who started with relatively humble beginnings, but were constantly learning and evolving. And what that created for me personally was a platform, regardless of the situation or the schools or the other things that were challenging, was that sort of idea that you should actually explore, that you actually should grow. So I took sort of the hard work ethic, but relatively humble sort of like start on the outskirts of Atlanta, and through lots of grace and lots of investment by many people, I was able to go to college at Vanderbilt, where I studied electrical engineering and computer science. I was able to get some wonderful internships through a program called Inroads that actually allowed me to work at AT&T before going to Deloitte Consulting. And then, which actually has a whole bunch of wonderful learnings there. One of my big learnings at Deloitte was how hubris and a lack of humility could actually get you fired from projects. And so and I experienced that, and there was some good learnings that both our clients and the firm there was patient to share. But I went from there to Harvard Business School, which was an experience where I met a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different perspectives. And then I went out west and I joined Microsoft, which had a completely different set of learnings and experiences. And you talk about personal growth. Yeah. My career in Microsoft was one of rapid learning and sort of like professional development and some serious mistakes that actually caused me to take a couple steps backwards before I learned some more there. And so that's the wide swath. I left Microsoft and went to another startup, and then eventually came to Rapid7.
Mm. One of the things in the short time I've known you that I've noticed about you is you really do share your story, and talk about mistakes that you've made, which is a great thing to do. I mean, there's so much conversation today about authentic leadership, authenticity, actually tying back to the growth question. In our research, we found authenticity is one of the two most important qualities in leaders that drive growth, which isn't what most people think. Most people think it's going to be confidence or decision making and things like that. Those are table stakes. So, as you've thought about your own life and maybe some of the things that you have learned, sharing maybe something really authentically painful for you, is there something that leaps to mind that has become a lesson that you've shared with other people?
Yeah, and so, I've shared a couple of different, so one of them, the experience I told you at Microsoft, where I had a wonderful career, but I took a step back at a point in time where I was managing this launch on this project team, and I had this sort of amazing opportunity, and I was super focused on delivering a great outcome and great results. And I was so focused on delivering a great outcome and great results that I did not focus on the how of delivering and the people aspect of how you deliver those. And I remember making this statement at the time that I was reprimanded for, and then came back to haunt me when I was proudly said, "Listen, it's a tight deadline, but we're going to do it, even if we burn everyone out doing it." And the head of the group at the time said, "That's not acceptable." He's just like, "You have to find a way to do it and have it to be a uplifting experience." And I didn't actually hear him.
Yeah.
And
you said, yeah.
I said, yeah. I said,
yeah.
What you really want is to deliver the results. And it turned out that's not what he actually meant. Because a couple months later, he called me in. He said, "You're doing a great job delivering the results, but you can no longer be in charge of the project because you're damaging the team."
Wow, that was painful, huh?
And that was quite painful. And it was even more painful because the person that they reflected with me wouldn't let me quit. And I really wanted to actually quit. And I had plenty of job offers, all this other stuff. And I remember her telling me at the time, as I was quitting, I remember her telling me at the time, she's like, "No." And I'm like, "You can't tell me no, I can quit. It's a free world." She's like, "I'm not letting you quit because if you quit now, you'll always be a quitter."
Wow.
She's just like, "You made a mistake." She's just like, "This will decide whether you learn from your mistakes or you quit every time you make a mistake." And she was right. And I stayed, and it was painful, and it was somewhat embarrassing. But I learned a lot, and it was well worth the experience.
Yeah. Well, that's how you That's how you develop practical wisdom, right? It's how you become wise. You learn from your mistakes. You can make mistakes, but you got to learn from them.
Gotta learn from them.
How would you say that has shaped your leadership style?
So what it actually started off more holistic. It started introspection, where a more holistic version of leadership. And I would say the biggest way that I think about it, and the point that the leader was making at the time, was leadership is about sustainable leadership. It's not about discrete accomplishments. Mm-hmm. If you're going to rack up, accomplishments matter, and delivery matters, but what you want to rack up is decades-long accomplishment, and that requires sustainability. And in order to have that, you actually have to have a focus on the team, the people, the dynamics, because that's what allows you to actually endure sustainably. You know, I heard this person who spends a whole bunch of time in sports, who I respect a lot recently, talk about sort of like their view on professional athletes and sort of like team, and how they really look at sort of managing consistent team health, not just in a season but over seasons, and how they're willing to make trade-offs to ensure sort of like sustainable team health, and that's what creates a winning sort of like team record. And I was struck by that because I hadn't thought about that and I hadn't heard that perspective before. But I think it's a lot with the same with organizations, is that you have to focus on the organizations and the individuals and the teams. And those are all different. The individual is different than the team, which is different than the organization. But you want all those to be healthy and performing. And if you get that combination right, that's what allows for a sustainable track record of success.
Right. And sustained growth.
And sustained growth. Yeah. And then that delivers the sustained growth. And that's how you get the sustained growth, where it may sort of like dip down and go back up, but that health is what allows you to actually have, you know, shallow dips and sort of accelerate out of them.
Yeah. The technology industry in general, which you're a part of, I know you're a segment of that, but the technology industry in general is facing a lot of headwinds right now because of questions around privacy, Facebook, but there's a lot of other stuff going on that's causing people to question and trust, causing them to question whether they trust companies. So I'm curious about, because you're in the cybersecurity business, trust is essential to your business and your industry. How do you maintain that kind of trust with customers?
Well, I think it's like any other type of trust. I think the trust you get, and it's funny, we have a big effort here going on, is actually, it's in many ways it's tied to your behavior. And I would argue the way you damage trust the most is if you say one thing but you behave another way. And so one of the big focus areas that we actually have right now is to allow freedom, experimentation, exploration, the things that actually nurture and create a healthy environment for our employees. But for both our employees and our customers and our partners, is to ensure that we deliver a core set of consistent experiences so that they can see our behaviors are consistent with our values. And for that, it's weird because even though we're innovative and other things, is that does require a level of investment in process and other things, because consistency of behavior with your values matters hugely for trust. And so we're doing an exercise and work with the team about how do we have an empowered team that delivers a consistent set of experiences that support the values that we continue to espouse. And that's part of growth too. As you grow more, it's sort of like you have to actually find different ways of living your values there. So I think that's the first thing. It's sort of like it's not just what you say; it's how you live. And I think that's the first thing. I think the technology industry in general is experiencing sort of like two twin issues. I think for a long time, it was the darling of sort of like the U.S. Business sector, industrial sector, everything. I think there was going to always be a natural shift. It could not. There's no way that the tech sector, which was small and now dominates the Fortune X, whatever list you actually want to put up there. Mm-hmm. Once you actually have that much power, then people look at you differently. And so I would say broad-based success in the technology industry was always going to lead people to a reevaluation of the role that they actually play in society. So I think that was inevitable. I would say that myself and other tech leaders probably didn't consider that as thoughtfully as we should have there. I would say the other one that's probably more particular to the tech industry is that we spend a lot of time thinking about one lens of how we actually impact society.
What was that lens?
And I think the lens that we impact society is the experiences that you have, what you could do, and some of them were about quality of life, but it was actually to broaden the set of experiences that you could actually have.
Right.
Whether
And that
that's
was the
social
only mission,
experience,
in other words,
exactly.
yeah.
Whether it was a social experience, whether it was a productivity, but we enabled people to do things in different ways. And by the way, in ways that many of them enjoyed. But we were enablers of allowing people to express themselves, engage, work in different ways. And by the way, and that's why I love technology. I think that's the power of technology. I would say though that because it's become so pervasive, we're now having to actually really be thoughtful and considerate about sort of like the responsibilities that come along with power, and I think that's sort of like a maturity, and I consider that that's sort of a maturing aspect.
Do you think the industry is going to mature that way and take into account the larger responsibilities that it has?
I think so. I mean, look, I think we're behind the curve, but I would say that if you look at the rapid changes in, I think, attitudes and the approaches, I think we are maturing there. I'd argue that we're doing as well, is not better than the maturity that, like, if you think about how long it took earlier industries to actually sort of like mature to sort of like the role that they played in society. I would not say that we're far afield of that. And the other thing is that if you look at the crop of people coming into technology companies today, not just the millennials, but the Generation Zs and stuff like that, there are very different attitudes to basically the world, the constructs, and social contracts. And so I think that I think there's a optimistic path, but it's actually going to be sort of a painful change for lots of people. And I think part of what's going to make that successful is the extent that technology can fix one of its bigger issues, which is the inclusion of a broader set of people into the industry, which has been the other thing that the technology industry has rightfully been taken to task for, which is, technology is an aspect of sort of the whole funneling system that we actually have in the world, which actually I think limits opportunity and limits inclusion. But I think it's something that with the place that we play in the world, we have to be active participants in.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I do want to talk about inclusion and diversity and creating a sense of, I like to call it belonging. It's not just including people around the table, it's making sure that people feel affiliation and membership, like they really belong there. How do you create that here? Because this is really tough. So many companies have a board mandate to do it, executive initiatives, and it's still not working. So how do you do it here?
So you just gave a lovely descriptor that was about the purpose and the experience and not about the goal.
Yes.
And so, look, I think measuring things is powerful in retrospect, but I think the experiences are the ones that matter. So the way that we're approaching it here, and even though I am a Black CEO, we still have issues that we're working on in Rapid7 about having more inclusion and more diversity. And so we've taken a multi-pronged approach. And by the way, we're better than industry averages. But just like I talked about, you can never rest on, it can always be better. And we believe that we can be better. So we have a multi-pronged thing. We start with the experience, which is that definition of inclusion about belonging is sort of like where we start, where this is a place where people of many different sort of like backgrounds and beliefs can actually belong and be a part of. And part of that is having a core set of values that are expressed consistently through behaviors, because they both go together. Having a clear set of values that are expressed consistently through behaviors that are accessible by a wide range of people and allow participation. I think it's more challenging if your values are such that only a narrow set of people can participate in it, or your expression of those values is only a narrow set of people can participate in it. But that's where we actually start: a clear set of values and a clear set of behaviors that we expect that enables broader participation. And that's why we focus so much on our culture, because if we get that culture formulation right and we nurture it in the right ways, it will create that sense of belonging. The second thing is there's lots of tactical stuff that we actually have to do with how we manage a whole bunch of different things that we're actually going through and changing. Mm-hmm. So how do we actually source candidates? Mm-hmm. If you decide you're only going to hire from like the top 5 schools in the country, then you've pretty much said you're going to get a biased pool that's actually there. And so what we found is that, no disrespect to my alma mater, which is amazing, just to be clear, the school that people went to, when we actually looked at it, the fact was uncorrelated to the impact they actually had on the organization.
There's a lot of research on that.
And so then when you look at that, you're like, okay, then why am I so obsessed with that? Mm-hmm. And so we actually are actively now, we've already taken steps at broadening our funnel through programs like Hack Diversity here, but we're looking at other things, but broadening our funnel and saying like, all right, what are the characteristics that align with our values and of talent, and how do we do a better job identifying talent? Because the funneling system that comes through schools and GPAs is in many ways, it's just a lazy system to make it easy to filter. It has no correlation to what talent you get. So you actually do all this work and you filter and you say, I'm going to go to this small set of schools with these GPAs, and it's massively uncorrelated to basically the impact that people have.
Yeah.
And so we actually have to actually put more energy into actually how do we actually just find great talent? And when you actually focus on finding great talent, it turns out that you remove stupid filters. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first thing. So removing stupid filters, finding great talent. And that's an active sort of like project that we actually have, or set of projects that we actually have going on. The next leg of it is that if you do that, you have to make sure that not just it's a sense of belonging when people are here, but you want people to feel like they can belong as they go through the process.
Really, even when they're interviewing?
Even when they're interviewing.
Wow.
Because what will happen is you'll go through all this effort and you find talent, and they look at it and they say like, oh, I don't think I'm going to belong there. And you've actually lost out. And so we've had to expand how we think about that sense of belonging.
Yeah. That is so cool, because I'm thinking about how often when I took a job, or I know even when kids go to college, they can drive onto a campus and know in a minute whether they belong there or not. But I've never heard a CEO talking about that, creating that from the very start, the moment somebody walks in the door.
And so we're having to re-explore that whole process of the engagement there. And it's an active project, just to be clear there. But that point about what people say, and there's certain things that we actually want people to actually feel like they belong, and sometimes they don't belong. So, for example, if people sort of like come in and they say like, oh, that's energetic but buzzing around, I need solitude. Well, they probably don't belong because it's a super collaborative space. And that's an okay type of sort of like thing. Now we have to make sure that we are inclusive of introverts and other things there, but like it is sort of a high energy, high collaboration environment. And so you actually work to actually make sure that you actually have those things. We have people that say, they come in and they say, I find it a little bit sort of like stressful, this idea that basically I'm always going to have to evolve. It's just a sort of a stressful expectation. And that's an okay. So you want to have a sense of belonging, and you want it to have nothing to do with the race, ethnicity, gender, but you want to be clear that that sense of belonging is sort of affiliated with your values, and your values don't actually bias against people.
Yeah. Well, I want to just go back to something you said earlier about the measurement. Of course we have to measure things, like you say, and that's important. But to me, it's always been more important to measure behavior. Yeah. It's measure the behaviors in the culture.
Absolutely.
And if you can do that, that's why we developed the assessments that we did, and they measure things like culture and character, because if you can measure that and you give that feedback to leaders, then they know, what am I doing to create an inclusive culture or not? What am I doing that makes people feel like they belong or not? To me, that really is where it's at, and it's really cool to hear you talking about that.
No, I agree, and I think helping people understand how their behaviors impact the culture and the environment, I think is one of the more powerful things, especially as you're developing leaders and managers and other people. because often they don't know. And so often the tools and the assessments help them understand, because I would say for many, many people, their behaviors are unexplored. They never think about why they behave in certain ways and why they respond in certain ways. And so providing some structure that allows them to actually just question, sort of like, all right, why do you do that in these circumstances? It ends up being one of the more powerful development tools.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to your story from, you know, where you're trying to drive everybody harder and harder. That's an overstrength, right? You've got to dial it back. So that's a really cool observation. So what advice would you give CEOs who want to drive the kind of sustained growth that you're enjoying here?
I think I'll probably conclude, or not conclude, but I'll talk about it in the way that I sort of like started it, is that if you view growth as the objective, you're limiting yourselves. And so I think growth is an outcome of how well you learn and how much value you create in the world. And that's value for customers, that's value for employees. You have to capture it. And by the way, there's some people that don't capture the value.
Yeah, sure.
But by and large, the harder one, I think more organizations fail because they're not actually focused on, are they actually generating things that make someone's life better? Some organizations' life better, some individuals' life better, some families' life better. When we think about our business, we think about how do we make the technology teams that are responsible for, and our customers that are responsible for helping our customers navigate and deliver their problems. How do we actually help them do their job better? How do we make their lives better? How do we allow them to innovate securely so they can have the pace of innovation they want, but they can do that security so they can actually sleep more and focus more on innovation? Those are the people whose lives we actually want to make better and more productive. And I think that when you're focused on that, then the numbers, the metrics, the revenue, the growth, they're helpful. But when you focus too much on the output metrics, you correspondingly become blinder and blinder to the foundation and to the fundamentals.
Corey Thomas, CEO Rapid7, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I've learned so much from you, and I know our listeners have too. Thank you.
It was a great conversation. Thank you for having me again.